pages of damning evidence, one empty Senate chair, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez standing alone in the chamber, refusing to let silence win. As cameras rolled across the nation, the seat reserved for Senator J.D. Vance remained untouched until the truth sat in it. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the facts. And what followed wasn't politics. It was a reckoning. In a room built for debate, only one voice echoed, and it belonged to someone who actually showed up. But here's the deeper truth. This story is dramatized. The details may be fictional, but the emotions, the questions, the urgency, they're real. Because in today's America, when those in power stay silent, it's up to others to speak louder. So we ask you, if you were in that room, what would you have done? The lighting seemed brighter, the chairs more rigid. The marble floors, polished to a mirror's glare, reflected the pacing feet of aides and interns who knew something was about to happen, but didn't know what. The official schedule read like any other. Special oversight hearing, corporate environmental negligence. But the sudden media presence, tripods setting up early, reporters straightening their collars, camera bulbs being tested twice over, told a different story. They were waiting. Then she walked in. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, alone without fanfare, no entourage. Just a navy blazer, rolled sleeves, and a binder so thick it seemed to bend the laws of paper. Her steps were measured, not slow, but deliberate, like each footstep was a declaration. Under her left arm was something unexpected. A white placard, sharp-edged, unassuming, except for the name printed in bold black letters, J.D. Vance. She moved to the front row of the committee bench and stopped at the seat to her right, still empty. Without looking around, without speaking a single word, she placed the placard neatly against the chair's back. Then she sat beside it. And that's when the room exhaled. Camera shutters fired like popping corn. Reporters leaned in, whispering as they typed. Even the marble underfoot seemed to listen. The placard was a message, and it spoke volumes without a sound. One senator across the aisle muttered to another, "What is she doing?" Another replied under his breath, "Making a statement before the hearing even starts." The chair she marked wasn't just a chair, it was J.D. Vance's. But Vance was nowhere to be seen. No official absence recorded, no press statement, just silence. The cameras kept rolling. From the media gallery, a Fox reporter scribbled, "Symbolic stunt," while a CNN correspondent simply whispered to her mic, "AOC arrives early and reserves a seat for J.D. Vance, the man she's about to confront, if he shows." The binder on her desk was open next. Tabs lined the pages, red, yellow, black. One tab read, Palestine, Ohio, children. Another, chemical exposure, timelines. The last one, votes versus donations. The kind of binder that doesn't belong to someone coming to speak. It belongs to someone coming to prosecute. But still, she said nothing. AOC's gaze scanned the room, calm but coiled. She wasn't looking for applause. She was looking for a witness. And the chair beside her, empty, silently awaited its occupant, or its judgment. Then the whispers turned public. A journalist's tweet, "Breaking: AOC sets J.D. Vance's nameplate on empty Senate chair ahead of today's hearing. He's not here. She is." It racked up 18,000 retweets in 10 minutes. The phrase "empty chair" surged on social media. On TikTok, teens speculated this was another RBG moment. On Facebook, veterans nodded, writing, "Finally someone shows spine," and yet still no sign of J.D. Vance. Back inside the chamber, a Capitol Hill staffer passed AOC a small printed update. She read it, then tucked it under her binder. She still hadn't spoken, but the silence was now unbearable. Not because it lacked sound, but because it carried meaning, weight, suspense. You could feel it in your spine. Something was coming. And those watching from their living rooms, break rooms, and offices across America knew they had to stay, because whatever this was, it wasn't politics as usual. The opening gavel fell with its usual dull thud. A senator coughed politely. A few aides adjusted their headsets. But as the introductions moved line by line down the dais, one figure remained motionless. AOC, Her hands rested calmly on the binder, her gaze fixed ahead, neither aggressive nor relaxed, measured as though counting seconds that someone else should have claimed. Her name was called. She gave a small nod, but she did not speak. Instead, she slid her fingers to the black tab on the binder's edge, one labeled in bold, J.D. Vance, Contributions and Consequences. She flipped it open with the careful authority of a prosecutor, not rushed, not hesitant, just exact. The first page had 3 columns: date, donation, decision, and a fourth, impact. She pulled out a highlighter, yellow like a warning light. She marked one row, then another, then paused on the third. The chamber could hear pages turning, but still no words. It was then that a mic, perhaps accidentally still live, caught her voice for the first time that morning. Just one sentence, soft and clear. Let the record show, absence doesn't mean immunity. A senator 2 seats down blinked. Another cleared his throat. The court reporter, normally robotic, glanced up for a moment. Was that off script? But across the nation, the internet caught fire. A back row journalist live tweeting the hearing paused, looked up, and furiously typed, AOC just whispered, absence doesn't mean immunity. Hashtag empty chair testimony starts now. Within minutes, hashtag empty chair testimony was trending. Fox analysts called it a performance. MSNBC called it a protest in posture. But the people watching at home, nurses in Ohio, retired veterans in Pennsylvania, single mothers in Michigan, they called it guts. And AOC? She said nothing more. Not yet. The chair beside her, still empty, now looked occupied. Not by a person, but by what wasn't there. The space itself had a presence, a gravity. The chairperson, trying to resume normality, cleared her throat and addressed the room. As of this session, Senator J.D. Vance has not responded to the committee's request for attendance. We will proceed. There was no gasp, just the collective tightening of air. AOC didn't move. She didn't smile. She simply underlined one final word in her binder. Negligence. It wasn't spoken aloud, but somehow everyone heard it. The microphones would now stay on. And so would the eyes of a nation that had already tuned in, not for politics, but for accountability. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just shown, you don't need volume to be heard, you need purpose. Today's hearing, she began, her voice echoing with formal steadiness, has been convened to address corporate environmental negligence and governmental inaction in the wake of chemical disasters, most notably the East Palestine train derailment and subsequent toxic release in Ohio. There was no need to elaborate further. Everyone knew what she meant. Families had been displaced. Water had been declared undrinkable, soil contaminated. And all along, public officials pointed fingers like they were passing hot coal, just fast enough to avoid being burned, but not fast enough to extinguish the damage. The chairwoman continued, this committee's role is simple, to ask why the alarm bells were ignored, why federal oversight failed, and whether elected officials benefited more from silence than service. The line landed like a soft gavel of its own. Some senators shifted in their seats. Others looked down, suddenly interested in their papers. But one figure remained absolutely still. AOC. Her hand rested on the binder, but now, gently, deliberately, it moved to the white placard she had placed earlier. She brushed the edge of it, not with force, but like one might run a fingertip across an old photograph, not to draw attention, just to remember. The name on the placard read J.D. Vance, but in that moment, it may as well have read accountability. Her face didn't move, but her eyes did, scanning the room, reading every senator like a page, measuring the silence between them like margins in a document. She wasn't just preparing to speak, she was preparing to anchor. The chair beside her stayed empty, but its presence grew louder. So much so that one reporter near the rear scribbled, "It feels like someone invisible is on trial." The weight of the moment was no longer procedural, it was moral. And still AOC said nothing. But inside, her thoughts ran clear and sharp. They built their walls of silence, brick by brick, denials, deflections. donations. But I've brought every fact, every story, every name they buried, and I'll stack them high enough to climb over. This wasn't just testimony, it was confrontation. She could feel the eyes of staffers, of aides, of the public watching live across the country. People who had tuned in expecting political theater, maybe even waiting to scoff. But what they would get was something else. The binder on her desk, with its colored tabs and handwritten annotations, was no longer just a prop. It was a map of decisions, of every fork in the road where lives could have been saved, but weren't. The camera light above her blinked red. Live broadcast. Her mic came alive with a faint click. The chairwoman glanced her way. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, your statement? AOC didn't reach for her notes. She reached for the truth. And for the first time that morning, she leaned slightly forward and spoke. Not to perform, not to posture, but to begin. And across America, hearts leaned in too. Let's start simple, she said. Her voice was steady, unhurried, unshaken, untouched by performative emphasis. But the clarity was piercing, the type that forces a room to quiet itself, not out of respect, but necessity. She tapped a small remote. Behind her, the screen flickered to life. A clean white slide appeared, a timeline, linear and surgical. At the top, in red, a single word: deregulation. AOC turned slightly in her chair, eyes still down. In 2021, Senator J.D. Vance publicly supported a sweeping reduction of Environmental Protection Agency regulations on rail transport, stating, and I quote, "Over-regulation strangles local economies." She clicked again. The timeline moved forward. 8 months later, July 2022, a series of safety inspections were quietly rolled back for Class 3 rail carriers operating through rural Ohio. One of those carriers was Norsen Freight, a company with known violations in hazardous materials handling. Another click. February 2023, East Palestine, Ohio. A toxic train derailment results in the spillage of over 1.1 million gallons of hazardous chemicals, affecting more than 2,000 residents. She paused, then the next slide. This one's simpler, a donation ledger. In March 2023, less than 6 weeks after the spill, Senator Vance's re-election committee received a series of campaign donations totaling $418,000 from 3 holding companies linked to Norsen Freight. No one spoke. Her voice remained level, but every sentence landed heavier than the last. "I'm not alleging coincidence," she said. "I'm suggesting correlation. And the victims of that correlation don't work in high rises. They live in one-story homes with water they can't drink and air they can't trust." She lifted the binder and turned it toward the committee bench, revealing a page highlighted in thick yellow strokes. Here is the senator's vote history over the last 18 months. He voted against restoring EPA spill response funds. He voted against an emergency testing program for communities exposed to airborne carcinogens. And he co-sponsored a bill to make private rail records inaccessible to state-level investigators. Then she let the binder fall closed, not with force, but with finality. A long silence filled the chamber, the kind that prickles against your skin, not because it's cold, but because you're waiting for someone to deny what was just said, and no one does. She looked up slowly and met the gaze of each senator who had once dismissed this hearing as political theater. "What's the cost of silence?" she asked, not loudly. "We measure it in hospital visits, in prescriptions, in funeral expenses. But let's be honest, some measure it in dollars received." The air felt thicker now, the kind of thickness that made people shift in their seats without knowing why. AOC leaned back, her tone never rising, her expression never breaking. Her calm, that was the warning. And the room, tight with tension, understood. This wasn't the end of the testimony. It was just page 1. Her fingertips paused for a moment on the corner of a folded letter, creased, handwritten, and faintly smudged with ink that had bled slightly through the lines. Not a press packet, not prepared remarks, a piece of someone's real life. "This," she said softly, "was postmarked from East Palestine, sent by a public school teacher named Lorraine Kendricks. She wrote this 2 weeks after the spill. She unfolded the letter carefully, as if it could break. I teach 7th grade science, or at least I try to. I have 12 students who sit near the window. On windy days, 4 of them wear masks. By third period, 3 have requested to go to the nurse because they feel lightheaded or can't catch their breath. I keep a box of tissues near my desk now. Not for runny noses. Those stopped. Now it's just nosebleeds. The kind you can't explain. She looked up. Silence held the room again. The next line came not from AOC's voice, but from the committee monitors behind her. She tapped her remote, and the footage began to play. A cell phone video, shaky, filmed from the sidewalk outside Lorraine's school. Children coughing as they boarded a yellow bus. One clutches an inhaler. Another wipes blood from his upper lip with his sleeve. No narration, no music, just the quiet sound of pain happening in real time. Another clip followed, a wide panning shot of a neighborhood street, empty. Every house had taped notices across the front doors. Uninhabitable. Lawns yellowed. A small girl's bicycle lay in a ditch, half buried in silt. A senator to AOC's right looked down. She stepped back to the mic. This isn't theory. This isn't a committee exercise in abstract liability. This is what happens when chairs go empty. Not just today, not just this hearing. I'm talking about every meeting, every vote, every urgent plea that sat unanswered because the cameras weren't on and the donations were still flowing. She tapped her finger twice on the placard next to her. J.D. Vance. Let me be clear, she continued, her voice now tighter, not louder but sharper, like someone whose restraint was finally nearing its end. No child in this country should walk into a classroom and leave sicker than they arrived. She returned to the binder and held up another sheet. This is a medical report from Dr. Aisha Holmes, local pediatrician. In the 3 months following the incident, she reported a 72% spike in upper respiratory illness in patients under age 13. She described the air as chemical-laced fog and said it was like treating patients inside a slow-moving factory leak. AOC laid the page gently down. This is what environmental negligence looks like when filtered through the lives of the poor, the rural, the voiceless. These families didn't ask to be political pawns. They asked for clean water and breathable air. The video screen faded to black. The silence returned, this time deeper. A few camera operators wiped their eyes. One aide behind the panel looked frozen, mid-note. And across the country, people weren't just watching, they were remembering, reconsidering. Because in that moment, the hearing had shifted from policy to pain, and J.D. Vance's seat, still unclaimed, had become something more than empty. It had become accountable. One senator, gray-haired, calm in voice but sharp in deflection, cleared his throat with theatrical restraint. Senator Galloway of Kentucky leaned forward, clasped his hands, and said with practiced gravitas, "While I appreciate the Congresswoman's vivid presentation, I would caution the committee not to rush to assign blame to individual lawmakers before a full review of agency procedures is conducted." He turned ever so slightly toward AOC. This is, after all, a regulatory failure at the federal level, not a personal one. The sentence hovered in the air, perfectly polite, perfectly dismissive. AOC didn't hesitate. She stood slowly, not out of anger, but precision. Her hand rested on the binder, but she didn't open it. Her eyes met Senator Galloway's across the bench, unwavering. And then she said it. If you let a house burn, you don't get to say the fire isn't your fault just because you didn't hold the match. A few in the room stiffened. A staffer dropped a pen, and somewhere behind the chamber doors, a reporter whispered into their mic, "We're live with breaking coverage now." AOC just fired back, and it's direct. The senator leaned back, his face still composed, but his knuckles had gone white around the edges of his notes. AOC continued, voice calm but rising in gravity. Negligence isn't passive, it's engineered, it's funded, it's voted into law by those who would rather be re-elected than responsible. You don't need to spill the chemical to be complicit in its reach. She turned to face the committee as a whole, not just one man now, but the institution that allowed rot to flourish behind protocol and plausible deniability. This town is very good at building escape hatches, she said, but I came here to close doors. The monitors behind her still showed the last frame from earlier. An empty street in East Palestine. Still, abandoned, waiting. She placed her hand gently atop the binder and shut it, quietly but with the impact of a gavel. And just so we're clear, she said without raising her voice, that was just tab 1. Every head turned. Several senators exchanged looks. One staffer in the corner began rapidly texting. Outside the hearing, news outlets scrambled to update headlines. AOC blasts committee for deflection. You let the House burn. Hashtag just tab 1 trends as congressional hearing erupts. J.D. Vance still absent as accusations mount. Inside, the weight of her words settled in like smoke. You couldn't see it, but it was hard to breathe around. AOC didn't move to sit. She stayed standing, hands relaxed at her sides, letting the silence do what no gavel ever could. Hold the room still enough for the truth to echo. And it did. Because something had turned. Not just a look, not just a line, but the temperature. The hearing wasn't just a formality anymore. It was a reckoning. And everyone on that panel, in that gallery, behind every screen across America, knew one thing for sure. She wasn't finished. Within minutes, national anchors interrupted their regular broadcasts. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow leaned forward over her desk, expression sharp. Let's be clear, she said. What we witnessed this morning was not just testimony, it was confrontation, the kind that rattles the bones of this building. Fox News took a different tone. Tucker Hayes raised an eyebrow as he stared into the camera. Was it drama? Was it performative politics? Or was it just another episode of the AOC show? The chyron below read, AOC stages empty chair stunt. Cheap shot or political theater? CNN's midday host played it down the middle, narrating over split-screen footage. One side showing AOC setting the nameplate in place, the other showing J.D. Vance's seat, still unoccupied. The caption simply read, Where is Senator Vance? By 11:17 a.m., the moment had gone viral. A 27-second clip, AOC whispering, Let the record show, absence doesn't mean immunity, was reposted by over 400 accounts in under an hour. On Twitter, the hashtag empty chair testimony surged to trending slot number 2 nationwide. On TikTok, teens remixed her words with cinematic music and slow zooms. On Facebook, Vietnam veterans and retired factory workers shared the full segment with captions like, Finally, someone's saying what we feel. AOC didn't retweet it. She didn't post a follow-up. She didn't have to. The clip spoke for itself. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's team scrambled to catch up with the moment. At 12:03 p.m., a brief statement appeared on his official account. It was 5 sentences long. Senator Vance had a previously scheduled meeting with community leaders in his home state of Ohio. While he respects the concerns brought forth at today's hearing, he believes that solutions require more than speeches. The senator looks forward to engaging the committee at the next scheduled session. It was the political equivalent of backing out of the room sideways, without making eye contact. But the internet doesn't blink. Within moments, screenshots of the statement were posted alongside images of coughing children, sealed off schools, and the still echoing words, that was just tab 1. Commentators weren't done. On NPR, a retired EPA official weighed in live. What AOC did today wasn't theater, it was record-keeping. She's logging what history will read. A right-wing podcaster took a different route. I don't care how powerful it looked, he growled into the mic. This was a setup, a stunt. You don't bring a binder that thick unless you want the cameras. But one voice, an unexpected one, cut through. An Ohio mother named Sherry Rangel went live on her phone. Her face pale, her voice trembling. She simply said, My son goes to Lorraine's school. What AOC read this morning, that wasn't exaggeration. That was my life. Her clip was reposted by a veterans organization, then a climate action page, then a major sports figure. Momentum shifted. Back in the chamber, the hearing continued. But outside, online, on cable, in coffee shops and break rooms across the country, the real debate had begun. Because one chair was still empty. But it had never felt more full. There was a gymnasium in the South Bronx, dimly lit, the floor lined with folding chairs and the scent of cafeteria food still lingering in the air. Months earlier, long before the hearing was scheduled, AOC had stood there. No script, no staff notes, just her and the people who first sent her to Congress. It wasn't a rally. It wasn't even televised. It was the kind of meeting politicians often skipped because no one outside the zip code would ever hear about it. But she showed up. A mother had asked her, tears in her eyes, how she kept fighting when it felt like no one in Washington listened. AOC had held the mic, looked out at the tired faces. Grandmothers with aching knees, teens still in school uniforms, essential workers who had come straight from night shifts, and said the words slowly, deliberately, "We won't let silence win. Not here, not anywhere." Those words would echo louder months later, replayed beside footage of her at the Senate hearing, as pundits tried to figure out why her message had struck a nerve that J.D. Vance's team couldn't seem to numb. The contrast was becoming difficult to ignore. In the wake of the viral moment, Vance's critics resurfaced his donor records. One segment on CNN laid them out side by side. $418,000 from rail and freight companies since 2021. 0 public visits to East Palestine since the toxic derailment. 7 missed committee votes on environmental oversight. Cable panels began asking the unspoken question out loud. Is J.D. Vance protecting his voters or protecting his checkbook? On talk radio in Ohio, conservative callers split. Some defended him. He's not a showman. He's working behind the scenes. Others didn't buy it. Behind the scenes doesn't fix asthma, one caller snapped. We needed him in that hearing room. Meanwhile, AOC's campaign saw a different kind of surge. Her office reported a 312% spike in small-dollar donations, $10, $15, $25, from retirees in Michigan, teachers in Kansas, Vietnam, veterans in North Carolina. The average contribution, $14.67. But even more telling than the money were the letters. Hundreds of them. Typed, handwritten, folded in half, scrawled in neat cursive or messy Sharpie. They came in envelopes with stamps from every corner of the country. Her staff began pinning them to the office corkboard until they ran out of room. One note, written on lined notebook paper, read, "You said what my dad couldn't say before he passed. He worked the Norfolk Southern line for 22 years. Thank you," another, from a retired nurse in Toledo. "I've never donated to a campaign. I just did. You reminded me what it means to fight clean in a dirty place." AOC didn't post them. She didn't need to. She read everyone, and she knew exactly what they were. Not fan mail, fuel. Because in Washington, where so much is measured in airtime and outrage, these letters reminded her of something quieter, but more enduring. The people were watching, and they weren't watching for spectacle. They were watching for someone who remembered what a promise sounded like in a gymnasium with bad lighting and no cameras. Someone who had once said, "We won't let silence win." And now she was proving it. Outside, cameras were now clustered so tightly around the chamber's doors that security had to create a corridor. Staffers hurried back and forth with folders and phones glued to their ears. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stayed seated. She hadn't touched her lunch. She hadn't left her chair. The placard still sat beside her. J.D. Vance. Slightly tilted now, as if it too was waiting for someone who hadn't come. A senior aide leaned in and handed her a phone, the screen already lit with the trending tweet. At J.D. Vance, OH, cheap theatrics don't solve real problems. Serious solutions require serious leaders, not stunts. The image above the tweet was a photo of AOC mid-speech, one taken from an unflattering angle, posted by a partisan account. The caption underneath, "Not impressed." AOC read it once, then set the phone down. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't look for a response team. She stood up, quietly, and walked back to the microphone. The room hushed again, almost instinctively. Some senators weren't back in their seats yet, but the ones who were looked up, slowly, cautiously. The committee chair nodded. "Congresswoman, you may proceed." AOC took a breath, just one, and then said, "If your calendar couldn't fit this hearing, it'll have to fit history's judgment." There was no rise in her voice, no anger, no theatrical pacing, just the line, delivered plainly, clearly, as if it had always been waiting to be said. Someone in the press box dropped a pen. Another began whispering into a live feed mic, barely able to keep up. She just responded, "Live," without naming him, but she named him. She leaned slightly forward. "Let me be absolutely clear. This is not a performance. This is not a play for views or viral clips. This is a record. For every family who begged for clean water. For every parent who didn't know how to explain to their child why their home smells like chemicals. This is for them." Her voice remained steady, her tone never sharpening. "And if showing up is too much to ask of a senator, then maybe showing up is exactly where we need to start." At that, murmurs swept the room like a breeze. The senator next to her turned slightly, his expression unreadable. The chairwoman blinked once, then jotted something quickly on her legal pad. Outside, news outlets updated their lower thirds. AOC responds live to Vance's tweet. Then maybe showing up would be a start. In homes across the country, viewers sat up straighter. Older voters, many of whom had lived through hearings long forgotten, felt something familiar but rare. Clarity without spectacle. Fire without shouting. The camera stayed on her face. Her eyes didn't search for the lens. She wasn't performing for it. She was performing through it. For someone watching. Someone wondering if anyone in that building still remembered what duty looked like. A moment later, AOC stepped back. She didn't slam her binder. She didn't mic drop. She returned to her seat and laid her hand on the placard beside her. And without a word, she straightened it. Not for him. For the record. Heads turned. Reporters snapped to attention, hands instinctively lifting cameras. Phones buzzed in pockets as text alerts were pushed out instantly. He was here. J.D. Vance entered with a slow, composed stride, flanked by two aides in dark suits. His jacket was crisp, his posture deliberate. His expression was the practiced neutrality of someone who had read the headlines and chosen not to react to any of them. But the room had already reacted. The oxygen shifted. Photographers clicked nonstop as the frame came into view. J.D. Vance walking toward the committee table and then stopping. Because now his chair was not empty. It held a binder thick with color-coded tabs, a stack of notes neatly aligned, and still standing upright against the leather backrest. The white placard with his name, J.D. Vance. The same placard Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had placed hours earlier. He looked at it for a moment, just one beat too long. One of his aides reached as if to remove it. Vance lifted his hand, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it said don't. The aide froze, stepped back. Cameras caught it all, the angle, the hesitation, the hand. In the gallery, a reporter from NPR leaned forward and murmured into her mic, "And that, folks, is the image." Vance arrives, but the chair has already spoken. AOC didn't move. She didn't acknowledge him, not yet. Her fingers stayed laced together atop her folder, her eyes watching the center of the table as if nothing new had entered the room, but something had, and everyone knew it. J.D. Vance continued walking toward the seat and stood beside it. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in his expression. Not quite annoyance, not quite discomfort. Just the awareness that he was walking into a space already occupied, not physically but narratively. He adjusted his jacket, leaned down, and gently lifted the binder. His eyes passed over the labels. Timeline of failure. Votes versus impact. Children of East Palestine. He did not open it. He set it aside. Calmly, carefully. Then lowered himself into the chair and straightened his tie. The flashbulbs popped like distant fireworks. On C-SPAN's live broadcast, a Chiron appeared. Vance arrives late, takes seat filled by AOC's testimony. Back on social media, the photo of his hand hovering over the binder had already gone viral. Someone captioned it, "When the receipts beat you to the seat." And inside the chamber, the chairwoman acknowledged his presence. "Senator Vance, thank you for joining us." He offered a brief nod. "Apologies for my delay. I was with constituents in Youngstown." It was technically true, but even his tone admitted what the room already knew. He wasn't late because he forgot. He was late because he didn't expect it to matter. And now it did. AOC finally shifted. Her eyes met his across the table for the first time that day. No hostility, no theatrics, just precision, because now the chair was no longer the message. He was. J.D. Vance sat tall, his hands folded on the desk before him. His voice when it came was smooth, practiced, and low, like a lawyer reciting opening remarks to a jury he already thought he'd convinced. "Thank you, Madam Chair," he began. "I appreciate the opportunity to be here, though I regret the committee chose to proceed without ensuring every member's presence from the start." He glanced to his left, AOC's direction, but not directly at her. Not yet. "I spent the morning in Youngstown," he continued, "speaking with real citizens, folks who don't have time for grandstanding, but who care deeply about practical solutions." The word real hung in the air like static. The silence didn't last long. AOC didn't look away. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply reached into her binder, pulled out a single piece of lined paper, and held it up. It was the same letter from East Palestine she had read aloud hours earlier. "Then perhaps," she said coolly, "you can explain why I'm the one reading their words into the record while you were reading polls in a diner?" A faint ripple moved across the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, fingers hovering above keys. Vance's lips pressed together. "Congresswoman," he said with a measured chuckle, "I know you have a flair for the dramatic, and I'll admit it plays well to the cameras. But the people of Ohio need policy, not performance." He offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And they need senators who show up," she said calmly. A pause, then she added, slightly sharper but still restrained, "If truth looks like performance to you, maybe your comfort is the problem." The sentence landed hard. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In the gallery, one journalist dropped her pen and whispered, "We just got the soundbite." On Twitter, the line appeared minutes later on graphic tiles, overlaid on images of the binder, the empty chair, and JD's awkward glance. Vance tried to push forward. "We're here to find solutions, not to trade barbs. My constituents don't care about clever lines. They care about jobs and whether they can trust their government." AOC raised an eyebrow, no amusement in her expression. "Then maybe you should ask why so many of them are writing to me." She slid a manila folder across the desk. On its label, "Letters from OH-13 residents." The same district Vance claimed to be representing that very morning. He didn't open it. Instead, he leaned back, recalibrating. But the damage was already done. Because for all his effort to paint her as a performer, AOC wasn't playing to the room. She was speaking for the ones not in it. And that distinction was clear to everyone watching, especially those outside the Beltway, in homes that still smelled faintly of chemical runoff and disappointment. In the pause that followed, the camera cut to the binder, still on the table, still open, the highlighted names of donors and derailments glowing under the lights, and between them the tension shifted. Vance had arrived. He had spoken, but it was clear he was now on the defensive. She simply reached for a small speaker the size of her palm, pressed a button, and placed it gently on the table between them. A soft beep sounded. The room leaned forward. "This is a voicemail," she said quietly, "left 3 days ago on our office line by Dr. Martin Ellis, a pulmonologist in East Palestine who's been treating children and the elderly since the spill." She looked toward the committee chair, who gave a single nod, and then she pressed play. The doctor's voice came through, raspy with fatigue but clear. "Congresswoman, I don't know if this message makes it to you directly, but I need you to tell them, tell anyone who will listen, that our lungs are worth more than stock prices. I've had to turn away 2 patients this week because we ran out of breathing kits. We don't need sympathy. We need oxygen, air filters, and someone who isn't afraid to say this isn't normal." The message ended. No dramatic score, no edits, just silence. And that silence filled the chamber like smoke. A senator 2 seats down from J.D. Vance leaned back in his chair, arms folded now, not out of defiance but discomfort. His foot tapped involuntarily under the desk. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. Across the aisle, a staffer who'd been taking notes slowly set their pen down. AOC didn't say anything yet. She let the weight of the voice settle, let the words echo in the marble. Then she looked directly at J.D. Vance. He looked back. Their first real eye contact. No smirk this time, no shrug. Just a held gaze that lingered 1 beat too long. AOC spoke softly, but the line was surgical. Dr. Ellis isn't on television. He's not trending. He didn't get a campaign check. But he's burying his neighbors. JD opened his mouth slightly, as if to respond, but no sound came. He reached for his folder, flipped a page, then another, but there was nothing in front of him that could answer what had just been said. There were no graphs, no budget lines, no rebuttal, just a human voice. And for the first time that day, it was J.D. Vance, not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who seemed exposed. In the press gallery, a senior reporter whispered to her colleague, "This hearing just crossed a line. It's not partisan anymore. It's personal." On live television, anchors broke from pre-written scripts. AOC's quote about lungs and stock prices hit cable news tickers before the hearing even adjourned. But inside the room, it wasn't the media that had changed. It was the mood. What had begun as politics was now something else. The chairwoman tapped her gavel once, lightly. "Let the record include the audio submitted by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, labeled Exhibit D." JD finally looked down. Not in defeat, but in the unmistakable moment where preparation meets a truth too raw to deflect. AOC didn't press further. She didn't need to, because now the room had turned. And for the first time in the hearing, the silence didn't belong to the empty chair. It belonged to him. Gone was the casual detachment. Gone was the early morning political posturing. In its place was something taut, quiet, and waiting. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't waste time. She opened a new tab in her binder labeled Financial Relationships Documented. It was color-coded in red and gray, the ink still fresh from the last week of printing. "Madam Chair," she said clearly, "I request to enter into the record the following exhibit." She lifted a printed chart, 3 pages stapled in the corner. Its title, Campaign Contributions to Senator J.D. Vance, 2021 to 2023, Entities with Documented Environmental Violations. She passed a copy to the clerk, then raised her eyes to the room. "This isn't opinion," she said. "This is paperwork." She tapped the first column. Over the course of 2 years, Senator Vance accepted more than $400,000 in direct and PAC-related contributions from rail operators, chemical producers, and corporate subsidiaries directly tied to the Norfolk incident and its aftermath. The room stilled again. She clicked the remote. A pie chart appeared on the screen behind her. The majority slice was labeled Norsen Freight Holdings. Another, Midline Petro Group. Both companies had been named in EPA warnings within the past 18 months. These are the same companies that lobbied to loosen federal transport regulations and then gave generously to the campaigns of those who voted to make it happen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Across the table, J.D. Vance inhaled slowly, then exhaled with controlled rhythm. He leaned toward his mic. "With respect," he said, "I think it's important we remember something here. This is politics, not policy. Everyone in this room knows how campaign finance works. You take support from across industries. It doesn't mean you owe them your vote." He delivered the line like he'd practiced it. AOC nodded slightly, then responded, not with heat but precision. "And yet when the vote came up to reauthorize emergency environmental monitoring, you voted no." She let the sentence settle before adding, "That's not politics. That's policy." A murmur moved across the room. J.D. Vance straightened his tie, his smile returning like armor. "I think the Congresswoman misunderstands the complexity of balancing economic growth with regulatory oversight," he said. "You can't shut down every company just because of a few headlines. That kind of reactionary thinking kills jobs and scares investment." AOC didn't blink. She leaned forward slightly. "No one's asking to shut anything down. We're asking for accountability when people can't breathe. And with respect, poison isn't politics. It's physics." The sentence cut clean through the room. A pause followed, not just respectful, but disarmed, because no one could argue with the molecular structure of benzene in the water. No one could legislate away the coughing in school hallways, and no one could spin cancer clusters into talking points. Outside the chamber, media outlets clipped her, quote, instantly. "Poison isn't politics, it's physics." It trended within the hour. Inside, J.D. Vance turned a page in his notes but didn't speak. The evidence had landed. The rebuttal had missed. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room, even those who wouldn't say it aloud. This wasn't just political theater. It was a lesson in chemistry and consequence. AOC waited until the camera light blinked red again. Live. National coverage resumed. Then she turned fully to J.D. Vance, her voice calm, but unmistakably pointed. "Senator," she said, "I have just one question for you." He didn't look up immediately. He was scribbling something in the margin of his notes, perhaps buying time, or perhaps assuming it would be another exchange he could deflect. She waited until he met her eyes. "Would you drink the water in East Palestine? On camera?" The room stiffened. Every head turned. Several jaws slackened, stunned by the simplicity and the weight of the question. J.D. Vance blinked, then let out a short, forced chuckle. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, that's a stunt. No one's going to solve chemical exposure with a glass of water in front of a camera." He tried to soften it with a smile, tried to pass the moment off as theater, but no one laughed. AOC didn't smile back. She simply repeated the question, her voice lower, sharper. "Would you drink the water in East Palestine, on camera?" Vance shifted in his seat. "I'm not going to dignify that kind of spectacle. What people need is infrastructure, not gotcha questions." A few of his colleagues nodded, reflexively perhaps, but others didn't move at all. AOC leaned forward. "That silence you're offering right now? That's what those families hear every day, from every office they've called, from every email they've sent that went unanswered, from every hearing like this one, when the cameras go off and so do the promises." Her voice didn't rise, but her words struck with clinical precision. The camera zoomed in, capturing JD's hesitation. Not anger, not indignation. Just pause, and outside that image would be the one millions remembered. In Youngstown, a retired rail worker paused his TV and whispered to his wife. He couldn't say yes, not even pretend. In Pittsburgh, a high school civics teacher rewound the clip to replay for her students. This is what accountability sounds like. On Facebook, the moment spread like fire, spliced into 10-second reels, edited with subtitles and ambient music. Overlays read, "Would you drink it?" He couldn't answer. One line that shifted it all. But inside the chamber, the shift wasn't digital, it was visceral. Senators who had kept their distance from AOC's earlier arguments now sat straighter, watching J.D. Vance differently. Staffers exchanged glances. One senator from the opposing party looked away, not out of disrespect, but discomfort. AOC continued, her voice now softening, but only in volume, not in weight. "You claim to represent the people of Ohio, then don't deflect, don't delegate." She held up a photo, one of the many sent to her office. It showed a kitchen faucet in East Palestine. The water dripping from it was a pale yellow. The caption, handwritten at the bottom, read, "Still not safe." They're not asking for perfection, they're asking for honesty. And if you can't drink the water, Senator, at least have the courage to say so. J.D. Vance folded his hands, tapped a pen, but gave no answer, because there wasn't one that would sound right anymore. The moment had passed, the image had landed, and in its silence, something irreversible had taken place. AOC didn't push further. She didn't need to. She looked back to the chair beside her, where the placard still sat, and she whispered, just loud enough to be caught by the mic. "It was never about who sat here. It's always been about who listened." Something dull. The final round of statements had concluded. The testimonies had been heard. The evidence, read aloud, projected on screens, played through speakers, had poured out over hours. But now everything came down to numbers. Votes. The clerk stood beside the chairwoman, quietly reading from a printed sheet, preliminary tallies on the proposed environmental reform package. The bill included emergency medical aid for affected residents, federal oversight of hazardous transport zones, and increased transparency in corporate rail logistics. It needed 51 votes to pass out of committee and head to the Senate floor. It had 48, 3 votes short. A stillness took hold that felt heavier than any shouting match ever could. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but paralysis. AOC sat perfectly still. one hand on her binder, one hand on her lap. J.D. Vance leaned back in his chair and gave a shrug. Not an aggressive one, not smug, just casual, dismissive. "It's complicated," he said aloud, directed at no one and everyone. The phrase dropped like a lead weight in the room. AOC didn't look at him, didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for the mic in front of her. It made the softest click as her finger found the off button. And then she lowered it. That was all. No fiery speech, no parting shot, no dramatic declaration. Just silence. Controlled, deliberate silence. But across the country, people watching felt something deeper in that one gesture than in any headline they'd seen all week. In Akron, a woman watching on her tablet whispered, "She's done talking, and they're still not listening." In Montana, a retired Vietnam veteran turned off the TV and said to no one in particular, "They'll regret this silence." And in East Palestine, a boy named Aaron sat beside his mother on the couch, his hand still on his inhaler. He didn't say a word. He just watched AOC's hand fall away from the mic and understood more than most. Inside the chamber, the chairwoman cleared her throat gently. "The motion fails to advance. We will reconvene next session pending revisions." There was no applause, no outrage, just quiet shuffling. Papers gathered, chairs pulled back. The bureaucracy resumed its rhythm. J.D. stood up and tucked his pen into his blazer. "We'll revisit it next quarter," he said, almost like a promise, but it sounded more like a delay. AOC didn't rise immediately. Instead, she watched the others file out, watched the aides lean over to whisper to senators, watched the cameras begin to power down. And when she finally did stand, she did so with calm hands, composed steps, and a binder still closed. The placard, J.D. Vance, remained exactly where she had placed it. As she turned to leave, she paused beside the chair one last time. She didn't move it, didn't touch it. She just looked at it, and then walked away. Outside the chamber, a reporter asked her a question. "Congresswoman, are you frustrated with today's result?" She stopped, turned slightly, then gave the kind of answer that didn't need to be loud to be remembered. "I'm not here for results measured in hours. I'm here for records measured in generations." She kept walking, and across the country, the image of a mic being lowered, without anger, without sound, became one of the most replayed clips of the entire hearing. Because sometimes the loudest sound in a failing democracy is the one that doesn't shout. Inside, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in near darkness, the only light coming from the muted glow of a laptop on her desk. She was watching footage from earlier in the day. Not the highlights, not the viral clips, just the full raw feed. The camera angle didn't flatter anyone. No edits, no music. Just the moments as they were. Relentless, uncomfortable, real. She paused the video on the image of her hand resting on the J.D. Vance placard. Her fingers touched the space bar, then hovered. She didn't press play again. Her office felt like a museum after hours. Silent. Still. She hadn't taken off her blazer, hadn't touched the glass of water someone had left on her desk. The binder lay beside her, closed but not put away. The same binder that had sat in the chair meant for him. The same one that had been called a stunt, a strategy, a statement. But to her, it had always just been the truth. A soft knock came at the door. She looked up. Her assistant, Camilla, poked her head in, eyes tired but warm. "Sorry, one more envelope came in. Thought you'd want to see it before I lock up." Camilla stepped in and handed over a small, hand-addressed envelope. It was light blue, lined with faint, glittery stars, the kind you'd find in the kids' aisle of a drugstore. No return address, just a name scrawled in purple crayon. Lena, age 9. AOC smiled gently. "Thanks, Cam." The door clicked shut behind her. She opened the envelope carefully, mindful not to tear the drawing inside. It unfolded into a tri-folded sheet of notebook paper, wide-ruled, with an uneven heart drawn at the top. Inside it, the words, "For Ms. AOC." She read the letter slowly. "Dear Ms. AOC, my name is Lena, and I live in East Palestine. Our teacher showed us what you said at the hearing. She cried a little but said they were good tears. My grandma says you're fighting for us. I just wanted to say thank you for reading our stories. I hope one day you can come visit and we'll show you the creek. But we don't go in it now. Love Cornelia. There was a crayon drawing tucked into the fold. Two stick figures stood beside a crooked little house. One wore a blazer. The other had big curly hair and held a binder almost the size of her body. A sun peeked out from the corner, smiling. AOC's chest tightened. She let the paper rest in her lap as she leaned back in her chair, eyes blinking against a sting that came on faster than expected. It wasn't the sadness. It wasn't even the anger. It was the knowing. The exhausting, infuriating, unrelenting knowing that despite every fact, every truth, every name she'd carried into that room, the vote still failed. But then she looked at Lena's letter again and remembered something. This was never about a single hearing. It was never about whether J.D. Vance took the bait or the floor or the last word. It was about a little girl sitting in a house near poisoned water, drawing hope in the shape of a binder and a microphone. AOC stood slowly and walked across the room. She opened a drawer in the filing cabinet labeled Testimonies Unread. She gently placed Lena's letter inside, then hesitated, pulled it back out. Instead, she pinned it to the corkboard by her desk, right in the center. She stepped back and looked at it. The little stick figure, the awkward heart, the sun. It was everything that had gone unsaid in that chamber, and everything that still could be. She glanced at the laptop again but didn't hit play. She didn't need to hear the silence one more time. She remembered exactly what it sounded like. Instead, she picked up the binder, now worn at the edges, and tucked it under her arm. As she headed toward the door, she turned off the light behind her. The office fell dark, but the corkboard glowed faintly in the hallway's ambient light, Lena's drawing catching just enough of it to shine. A tech CEO stepped down. A celebrity divorce took over the trending feed. A new military package was announced abroad. On the surface, Washington had resumed its rhythm. Predictable, blustering, business as usual. But underneath, something had shifted. Not loudly, not in the spotlight, but where it matters, in the numbers that don't make speeches and in the spaces between conversations that aren't supposed to happen. The first signal came in the Friday morning polling data. A new national survey released by an independent think tank showed a 6-point drop in J.D. Vance's trust score among registered voters. But more telling was where it dropped. Among independents over 50, the very demographic he'd relied on for crossover appeal. A subsection noted that 72% of respondents had seen clips of the hearing. Of those, 62% said they trusted AOC more to tell the truth. Cable news didn't make it a headline, but the campaigns did. Behind closed doors, J.D. Vance's aides held emergency briefings, discussing whether his complicated comment had been too casual, whether shrugging on camera while discussing poisoned children had been a mistake that would stick. His office issued no formal retraction, no clarifying statement, just a new social post of him at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in Ohio, smiling, holding scissors. But the comment section didn't cooperate. Beneath every post, thousands of replies poured in. Will the water be safe this time? Cutting ribbons instead of cancer risks, huh? Would you drink it now? No matter how his team tried to pivot, the question followed him like a shadow. Meanwhile, AOC stayed quiet. No press tour, no victory lap, just a single message posted days after the hearing, paired with a photo of Lena's drawing taped above her desk. Some things matter more than a vote count. The post went viral, again, but not every response came with likes or hashtags. Some came quietly, in ways not meant for the public, and that's how she knew it mattered. Late Tuesday night, while reviewing follow-up documents in her office, AOC's phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen she didn't expect. Senator Rourke, Republican, veteran, 3 terms in office, known for towing the party line, known for not talking to her. They'd never shared more than 3 polite words in the hallway. The message was brief. I won't say it aloud, but well done. She stared at the text for a long moment, not because it shocked her, but because of what it meant. The facade had cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but real. Even silence under the right pressure begins to shift. Elsewhere, subtle movements echoed. A moderate Democrat from a swing state reached out to co-sponsor a revised version of the reform bill. A Republican staffer requested a briefing on the EPA data AOC had cited. A national teachers union reached out with an offer to amplify the testimonies she'd read into the record. These weren't tidal waves, not yet, but they were currents beginning to turn. In a town built on posturing, whispers are often more dangerous than speeches. And now, behind doors lined with American flags and soundproof panels, the whispers were no longer about her tactics. They were about her effect. She wasn't just changing the subject. She was becoming the subject they couldn't stop circling back to. And the people who once dismissed her as a performer were starting to understand something uncomfortable. Sometimes the one telling the truth is also the one winning the room. Even if no one clapped, even if no one said it aloud, not yet, no press, no cameras, just the low hum of the Capitol at rest. The hallways, once buzzing with aides and flashing badges, had fallen into a kind of sacred quiet, the kind that only appears when power sleeps. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't turn on the overhead light. She knew her space well enough. A single desk lamp cast a warm pool of amber over the documents still resting where she left them days ago. The binder sat at the center. It had been opened, closed, carried, quoted, challenged. It had taken a seat meant for a senator and spoken more clearly than some who held power ever would. But now it was still, waiting. She walked toward it slowly. Outside, the headlines had begun to shift. AOC's testimony reverberates beyond the hearing. Truth in the age of optics. Why the empty chair still echoes. Poison isn't politics. The line that sparked a movement. She hadn't chased the coverage. She didn't need to. The words had already landed where they were meant to. And that, more than a vote count or a news cycle, was what she had set out to do. She pulled a Sharpie from the drawer. On a clean white label, she wrote in block letters, Public Silence Versus. Public Record, EP Hearing, 23 inches. She peeled the back and pressed it onto the spine of the binder, smoothing it down until it stuck firm. Then she walked over to the bookshelf. It wasn't just decoration. Each row held folders, transcripts, original letters, names written in her own handwriting, cases fought and lost, cases fought and still unfinished, testimonies from people who didn't make it into the headlines, but whose stories still lived on in margins and margins of notes. She made space on the top shelf, the place reserved for the fights that mattered more than the outcomes. She slid the binder in slowly and paused. Her hand lingered on the spine, fingers tapping it lightly. There was no ceremony, no applause, but there was reverence. She whispered, not for anyone to hear, but to release what still needed to be said. You may have the chair, but I kept the voice. She let that sentence live in the room a moment, because that was the truth. J.D. Vance could keep the seat. He could keep the title, the votes, the polished optics. But he hadn't shown up when it mattered. And in his absence, she had made space for something larger. Accountability without spectacle. Advocacy without shouting. Truth without permission. And a girl named Lena, sitting in a home miles away from D.C., could now point to a television screen and say, she read my story. That was the voice. That was the point. AOC turned back toward her desk. Her body was tired, but not heavy. She had carried weight before. This was familiar terrain, the slow, unsatisfying work of doing what was right, even when it didn't pay off right away. Especially then. She shut off the lamp. Only the moonlight from the window remained now, spilling across the shelf where the binder had joined others. Files with names like rent cap hearings, ICE facility reports, and Flint Phase 2. She stood in the quiet. Somewhere beyond the walls of her office, decisions were still being made, committees still convening, lobbyists still strategizing. But in that small room, a war had ended, not with a bang, not even with a win, but with documentation, and that meant it would not be erased, because the silence of the powerful was now written down, and silence, once recorded, can never pretend it didn't happen. It wasn't Washington. It wasn't marble columns or nameplates or microphones wired to a national feed. It was a community hall in East Palestine, Ohio, with folding chairs lined in imperfect rows, a flag hanging slightly crooked behind a modest stage, and a crowd of neighbors gathered more out of exhaustion than expectation, But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had come anyway. No press conference, no podium, just her and a small table off to the side of the stage. On it, the same white placard she had placed in the Senate chamber. The name still visible, J.D. Vance. Beside it, an empty chair. No one said a word when she carried it to the center of the stage. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. They'd seen the clip. The moment had traveled here before she did. She looked out at the people, mothers, union workers, teachers, veterans, teenagers too young to vote, but old enough to feel forgotten. "I brought the chair," she said gently, "but today I won't be sitting in it." She stepped aside and gestured toward it. "If you have something to say, this seat is yours." For a long moment, no one moved. The room was still. Then slowly, a woman in a faded windbreaker rose from the third row. She walked to the front of the room with hesitant steps, one hand clutching a folded paper, the other trembling just slightly at her side. She sat in the chair. Not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. She looked up, met AOC's eyes, then faced the room. "My name is Joanna McKenna," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "My son Jacob was diagnosed with leukemia last year." A quiet inhale rippled through the crowd. "We live 5 blocks from the track. We didn't know what we were breathing for months. And when we finally found out, they told us it was fine, that it would pass, that we were safe." She paused, her eyes glassing over. "He's 9. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "Last week, he watched the hearing with me. He saw the chair. He asked me why the man with his name on it wasn't sitting in it. And I didn't know what to say." The room held still, as if even breath might break the moment. Joanna turned toward AOC again. "But then you read those letters, and he looked at me and said, 'She heard us.'" She wiped one cheek, stood, and left the paper on the seat. As she stepped away, a quiet round of applause began. Just a few people at first, then more. Not thunderous, not political, grateful. Others came forward, a teacher who had evacuated twice, a nurse who ran out of air purifiers, a grandfather who'd buried 2 neighbors in the last 6 months. Each took the chair. Each left something behind, a story, a letter, a photo, a name. By the end of the night, the seat wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with evidence, not the kind in binders, but the kind you carry in your chest. AOC stood nearby, notebook in hand, but she didn't speak again. She didn't have to. The people were speaking now. And the chair, once used to expose an absence of leadership, had become a platform for the presence of pain, truth, and survival. When the town hall ended, the crowd lingered. Conversations turned into hugs. Faces turned into names. And as she packed up, someone tapped her on the shoulder. It was a boy, no taller than her waist, clutching his mother's hand. "Is that the same chair from the TV?" he asked. She nodded. "It is." He looked up at her. "Can we keep it here?" She smiled. "It belongs here." And as she walked out of the small hall into the crisp night air, the stars overhead felt sharper somehow, like the sky had been waiting for the right people to finally be heard. At exactly 6:12 p.m., J.D. Vance broke his silence with a thread. Vague in tone, polished in language, and pointedly void of responsibility. "America needs unity, not division. Let's stop tearing each other down and start building solutions together. We can't afford to politicize every crisis." 3 tweets. No mention of East Palestine, no mention of the hearing, not even a passing acknowledgement of the chair. But he had tagged Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The response didn't come immediately. In fact, it came 11 hours later. At 5:08 a.m., just before sunrise, when only journalists, shift workers, and restless minds are awake, AOC posted a single photo. No caption, no filter, no quote. Just the chair. The white placard with J.D. Vance. The empty seat centered beneath the overhead lights of the town hall. The table beside it lined with letters, photos, and tear-stained pages left by real Ohioans who had filled the silence that day with their voices. The post detonated. Within minutes, the replies stacked up. Nothing more powerful than silence that speaks. She didn't answer him. She reminded him. This isn't politics, this is presence. By noon, anchors on CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News were calling it the political image of the year. It was on the front page of the New York Times digital edition. The Washington Post ran a headline above the fold, "An empty chair, a full room, how one image redefined accountability." Cable shows brought in branding experts and political historians. One compared the image to the lunch counter sit-ins, another to the Obama Hope poster, but back in Washington, it was less poetic. Staffers from both parties watched the ripple effect with unease. They debated in elevators, whispered in hallways, and texted each other screenshots from burner phones. Some Republicans criticized Vance for playing into AOC's hands. Others said nothing, just stared at the photo. In AOC's office, the energy was quieter. She didn't gloat. She didn't give interviews. She simply printed the image out, clipped it into a manila folder marked District Impact, and returned to her paperwork. That evening, her press secretary received a call from a journalist at a national outlet. "I know she's not commenting, but does she realize the weight of that post?" The press secretary paused. "She does," the reporter pushed further. "Then what was the message?" A soft chuckle. "She didn't post a message," the aide said. "She posted a mirror." Meanwhile, J.D. Vance attempted a second thread. "My office remains committed to hearing from all constituents. I regret any misunderstandings regarding the recent committee events." But the tone had shifted. No one was listening. He'd already been out-talked, without her saying a word. Political blogs broke down the timeline. Analysts circled back to one consistent conclusion. He underestimated the weight of absence. The public didn't forget. Days later, in a classroom in Columbus, a civics teacher showed her seniors both the tweet thread and the chair photo side by side. "Which one do you believe more, she asked. A student raised her hand. "The one with people in it, even if you can't see them." Elsewhere in Ohio, residents printed out the photo and taped it to their windows. Some turned it into protest signs. A few turned it into postcards they mailed to Vance's office with handwritten notes. "You missed your seat." "Still empty. Someone else sat in it, for us." The photo went from viral to lasting. It became a reference point, a moment that politicians would study and campaign managers would brief their candidates about. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. And in the end, the chair said what no mic could. That silence has a sound, and when it comes from the people, it echoes. Then the voiceover begins. Low, steady, unshaken. Some fight with volume, others with silence, but the loudest voice in that room was an empty chair filled with truth. We hear faint echoes, the shuffle of paper, a distant microphone click, the inhale before testimony. Then slowly the screen fades into a series of still images. AOC standing in front of the town hall in Ohio, holding nothing but a binder. The empty chair, now weathered but still upright, alone on a stage. A child from East Palestine, pointing at the screen, asking their mother, "Is that where they listen to us?" Then we return briefly to the Senate chamber. The same hearing room now quiet. Desks cleared, cameras gone, the chair still there. The placard, slightly smudged, still reads, J.D. Vance. Someone has placed a single sticky note on the backrest. It reads, "Don't forget." The voiceover resumes, soft but final. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to win a vote to leave a mark. Sometimes all it takes is showing up. And when some don't, someone else has to sit in for the silence. Cut to footage from different hearings. Scattered moments where other empty chairs appear. Unspoken tributes. Grassroots organizers holding town halls with similar setups. Teachers using the photo in civics lessons. Small ripple effects. We see briefly the binder, now part of a public archive in New York, labeled Exhibit 19, a public silence for public record, donated by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Then a final shot, AOC back in her office closing a cabinet. No audience, no statement, just a nod. She leaves the room and turns off the light. Fade out, pause. One last line whispered, like a memory. You may have had the seat, but the people kept the voice. Black screen. White text appears, based on real events and real silence. This is a dramatization, but the emotions and the stakes are deeply real. End screen, white text on black background. Subscribe for more stories where truth doesn't flinch. Because sometimes the empty chair says the most. A soft orchestral swell carries the credits. Nothing bombastic, just a single violin tracing out a quiet refrain. This story isn't just about AOC or JD Vance, it's about what it means to show up when it matters most. Through a single empty chair, we're reminded that silence can be both a weapon and a wound. AOC's refusal to let absence erase accountability speaks volumes, not just to the Senate, but to every American who has ever felt unheard. It's a call to courage, not the loud performative kind, but the quiet, consistent bravery of standing in truth. And maybe the most powerful moment wasn't shouted, it was whispered. It teaches us that presence, when anchored in purpose, can shift the course of the conversation. Question for you. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's quiet courage spoke louder than any speech? What did it leave behind? Disclaimer. Thank you. Subscribe. This story is a work of political dramatization. All characters, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and those portrayed as public figures, are fictionalized representations created for the purpose of commentary, education, and inspiration. Any resemblance to real events or individuals is purely coincidental. Thank you for watching and staying with us through this emotional journey. If this story made you think, feel, or reflect, we invite you to subscribe to Content Alexandria Rising, where we bring you bold storytelling that challenges silence, honors truth, and sparks conversation. Hit subscribe, share the story, and remember, even empty chairs can echo with power.